Hello and welcome to the Choreolosophy Podcast, a weekly podcast whose mission is multifaceted. Each week when you tune in, you will find episodes that question best practices, challenge music education dogma, facilitate conversations about touchy topics, demonstrate pedagogies, and conversations where colleagues learn from each other. This is episode 247, Solving Music Education's Literacy Crisis with Carol Krueger. If they cannot pick up a piece of music at the end of the year, at whatever level, and do it themselves, I would question what we had been doing in my classroom, says Carol later in this episode. So one of our most popular guests in the show's entire 6-year run is back for another episode. Carol Krueger returns with an update on the state of literacy levels for music students and pre-service teachers, as well as ideas to help make your process and pedagogy more efficient. We don't have to choose between truly fluent reading and diverse instructional methods. They serve each other. In this conversation, Carol Krueger and I discuss the challenges and opportunities in music education to solve many issues with one tool. We explore the decline in music reading skills among students, the importance of connecting music literacy with linguistic literacy, and the crucial role of higher education in addressing these issues. The discussion emphasizes the need for individualized instruction, practical solutions for improving literacy, and the significance of creating a supportive learning environment for students. Throughout the discussion, Carol provides examples of this better way forward that will allow us to make our pedagogy more efficient, saving time for giving our students more diverse learning methods that we believe that they need. Your music program or event deserves a platform that does it all, without the extra costs. With Ludus, you get seamless ticketing, built-in marketing, powerful fundraising, and volunteer management, where volunteers can sign up, schedule shifts, and track hours with ease. Need to sell merchandise and concessions in person? Ludus Retail lets you log sales by each group, track inventory, keep everything organized. Hosting music lessons or theater camps? They have a classes feature, which makes registration and student tracking effortless. And it's free for your organization. Thousands of programs already trust Ludus because they help you focus on what matters most, the performance. Are you a director new to the profession? Or are you a seasoned director who is in a new place? One of my favorite tips for generating interest in the program and to instill buy-in is to plan a trip. There are so many options. You can go to Orlando, you can go to Ireland, or you can perform in a parade or a theme park. You can even take the stage at Carnegie Hall in New York. Wherever you end up, not only will your current crew look forward to the trip, but younger students will count the days until it's their turn to go. If you have no idea where to start, connect with Kaleidoscope Adventures at mykatrip.com. I'm not sure how much, if anything, out there has not gone up in price since 2020, but I know one thing that hasn't, and that is the membership to the Patreon and to the Substack to support this show. The people who are signed up over there as paid subscribers, as my thank you to them, they can get things like t-shirts from the Choreolosophy.com shop. They can also get access to my Google folder of teaching materials that I've talked about on the show for over the years. And of course, they just want to help make sure that this show can continue. And one of those benefits is a shout out on the show. The producers and Inner Circle from Patreon are Brian Long, Chandler Smith, Venture Studios, Jonah Clicksbull, Danelle Eckert, David Kowalczyk, Jared Hendricks, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Herron, Nathan Hines, and Steve and Kathy Kakachik. It is a tricky conversation for sure when educators feel the need to challenge the status quo.
Well, and that's kind of normal, but you can't always win friends and influence people if you can't have a conversation with them. And so I'm always worried afterwards, maybe I shouldn't have said that, but I tend to be a girl that is going to be pretty honest.
Yeah. You know, in fact, first of all, we're kind of starting already, and that's okay. Carol Krueger is here, everyone. And we are doing, I'm going to call this a sequel to the most popular episode on the history of this show that wasn't about COVID, which is like a pretty storied thing for you, Carol. So congratulations and welcome back.
Well, thank you. And I'm glad to be back. Took me a while to get here again, but I am really impressed with what you're doing for music education through your Choreolosophy podcast. And so I'm a fan and I'm glad to be back on the show.
Well, I appreciate it. And as we were kind of discussing a second ago, since you were on before, it's been a few years, it's an interesting thing because I feel like the conversation about music literacy has really exploded. And of course, part of that is because I've been pestering people about it. Because as we were just saying, it's something that I think is an alarm bell that needs to be sounded. And so my perception is that my role has been to go out and yell at people and get them stirred up to pay attention to this idea. And your role has been to just provide solutions and figure out a way to help people do it better, because there are people who don't see it as a crisis, and that's fine. But the ones that do need resources, and they're not often provided with the resources. Thoughts about that?
I totally agree with you. There are many that I think we would call it the ostrich syndrome, that just stick their heads in the sand, do what they normally do in their classroom, and are not necessarily challenged to improve their teaching or to change it in any way. I think they also are happy with status quo and do not want to have to change a lot of their teaching. I think that's a part of our colleagues. But I also think there's a part of our colleagues who know that there has to be a better way than what they're currently using, are finding that they don't have solutions and actually go and search them out. And I think you've made both kinds of colleagues that we have, those who want more and those who are happy with status quo, have to step forward and say, is there a better way? Could I be doing more for our students? And could my students actually be better musicians when I finish with them? I don't know that that's everyone, but I keep hoping that we're going to find the right key to get people to step forward and say, I want to change my teaching. By the way, this is also at the collegiate level. And so the last couple of years, I've had far more college teachers, especially choral directors, come to me and say, Carol, I don't know how to begin to do this. Can you help me with this? How do I deal with today's kids? They're coming to me without these skills. Where do I begin? I've never had to start this low with my students. And so the fact that they're asking and that they're actually searching things out, to me, that gives me hope. And it's hope that I think keeps music ed going, because nothing is perfect in our world.
Right. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I'm glad you mentioned the involvement of the higher ed aspect of this, because we did touch on this briefly last time we talked too. And I do think it's interesting because I see a lot of the problems and some of the solutions coming from higher ed. In other words, there is a philosophy that is popular in our colleagues that says we actually are overemphasizing music literacy. We are pushing it too hard. And so, of course, that is going to be an immediate philosophical divide between somebody like you or me who says, actually, we're seeing this as getting worse, and we need to fight back so that it is doing more for our students with their literacy. We should be doing it more. It's undervalued. Those are two opposite perspectives.
I totally agree with you on that. However, if higher ed doesn't lead the charge, I think it's harder from a grassroots point of view. But
Absolutely.
I see the teachers being the ones who are leading the charge. Then when you get a comment back from higher ed, it's because they're finding themselves in uncharted territory. And so those are the teachers that I'm hearing from higher ed. What do I do, Carol? I've never had to start this low. I've never had to think about it, that these students are coming with these low-level skills. And as we see our regular linguistic reading skills going down, I think we're seeing the very same thing in music literacy. I don't see it necessarily getting better. I see it status quo at best, but really our students are coming to higher ed with less and less.
Yeah. Now, of course, also since you and I did our last episode together, I've really gotten a stick up my craw a little bit about the connection between linguistic reading and music reading, and I've really been working hard to make the argument that they're not that different. And so the way I see it is that overall reading literacy decline in the United States, which is massive and should be considered by every teacher as a crisis, is corresponding to the same music literacy decline, and I think it's probably in a lot of ways for the same reasons. Thoughts about that? Is that something you engage with?
I totally agree. I mean, I start every one of my workshops with, hey, music literacy and linguistic literacy are dovetailing. You can't look at linguistic literacy without seeing beat and rhythm and pitch and all the elements of music. And it's using a good part of the same sections of our brain. So why aren't we dovetailing with it? We also know from neuroscience, some of the latest research that's come out there, that students who have reading issues, they find that they can't keep steady beat.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can fix steady beat, we might be fixing reading problems. Not that I want music to be there because of helping linguistic, but why don't we use a team approach and start to realize our students have linguistic reading problems, and that is also transferring to music literacy reading problems. Just look at the eye. If the eye can't track, how are they going to track in music? And music reading much harder than linguistic because we're not only going left to right, but we're having to go up and down. We have
Mm-hmm.
kids with focus problems. I mean, all the issues that we're seeing in linguistic reading. So those same things are going to show up in our music literacy reading. I don't see us getting better with either one of these. I think we need to join forces. Also, our kids are not listening. They haven't developed their oral skills. And so many of our kids are just on their, iPad or whatever. They're not exchanging ideas with people. They're not verbalizing. They're not even reading with inflection in their voices. It tends to be that if we could get them to do more singing, get their bodies to move more, we'd see it hopefully move over to linguistic reading as well. So if they're used to just being in this little cubbyhole of their own entertainment, think what we could do for them by getting them into music and other things where they're in a community.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I saw a comment on my Facebook group yesterday, 2 days ago now, maybe, from a colleague, bless his heart, who said that music reading is actually now less of an important skill because iPads can now take a picture of the music and play it back for them. And I about spit out my coffee. And of course, my response was calculators can do equations for us too, but we didn't stop teaching kids to think about math and numbers in their head. Speechify is a really cool app that can read a book for you out loud, but it doesn't mean we stop teaching kids to read English either. So it just seems like a spurious argument. But what I'm curious to dig into with you now is you sent me some material before we started talking, and I want to engage with this question because I think you and I have already made clear today that we both think that these skills are important. So I don't think that the audience already knows that. And we also both think that these skills are on the decline. So what if I phrased it to you as more of an empirical question, which is it on the decline? Or are we just being nervous and scared for nothing? Is that as an empirical sense, like how do we know it's on the decline? And I'm going to start by reading something from a quote that you sent me. This was in the Journal of Music Teacher Education. Edward Asmus writes, I have noticed a phenomenon that seems to be on the rise. An increasing number of applicants auditioning for entrance into undergraduate music programs are unable to read music. Colleagues across the nation, music recruiters, ensemble directors, and theory teachers are all reporting an increasing number of entering music majors who are unable to read music notation and produce music on their major instruments from it. So, what would you say is the evidence for that?
Just go sit in an audition of entering
Okay.
students. And as I've done for the last 20 plus years, and those students might sing an aria rather well. But if you ask them to read simple stepwise notation, it doesn't happen. They often can't even keep the center of the pitch. Tonic isn't part of it. They can't keep beat. I mean, it's pretty amazing what they arrive with. Now, they may sing that aria pretty well, but they can't do it on their own. So I think what we're coming back to is, are we going to empower our students to be able to do things alone? Or are we going to enable them to create pretty good music, but they can never do it by themselves? Which one of those are we actually arguing for? I want the student to be independent, that can pick up anything, and that the world is theirs, rather than having to wait for someone to either play it for them, sing it for them, or find an app that does it for them. And then they're really nothing but magpies. And I agree with that, Smith. I mean, if you sit in, I wish all of the elementary, middle school teachers could come and sit in on one of those and watch. But here's another thing that he wrote later in the article was, if you asked people on the street, should music majors be able to read music? Should we expect them to? He said the overwhelming comment would be yes. If we asked middle school and high school and elementary music teachers, should students be able to be independent and be able to read music? Most of them would say yes. I don't think hardly any of them would say no. But where are we helping the cog in the wheel to keep moving in a spiral? And where are we actually a detriment to it? And I think that's some of the questions we have to ask our colleagues is, what are you doing to help that student learn? Or are you of the belief that it doesn't matter? As long as they put on a good show and the public is happy, that's all that matters. And
Yeah.
I hear that all the time.
Yes, that highlights another one of those philosophies that we are kind of at tension with here. So I mentioned earlier the philosophy that we are overemphasizing it, not underemphasizing it. That's one, and I just disagree, and I think you do too. But the other philosophy is, what is the point of our job? Is the point of our job for kids to sing songs in front of audiences? Or is our job to teach kids how to learn songs? And those are two completely different skills. We can put the song in their brain, so to speak, but that doesn't mean that they could then go learn a song when we were not in the room. And I think that's where some of that philosophical divide actually, where the rubber hits the road, so to speak. If you haven't already, I really think it's time for you to ditch the bulky sight reading books, the paper, all of the things that are already in the kids' folders in your classroom because it's not customizable to what they need in the moment. Sight Reading Factory allows this and so much more. And then the work we do in the classroom can be customized to what they need in the music and the repertoire they're learning, and it can be customized to their current learning level as a group. So use the Coralosophy checkout code, Coralosophy. When you check out, it'll give you a 10% discount every time you get a membership for yourself and for all of your students, which is really, really important so they can do this at home. Thoughts?
I think you're totally right on all of this, and that people who believe their job is to entertain and to engage kids. I mean, they do believe that their heart and their soul, and they're there for, shall we say, more social reasons sometimes, or mental health reasons, that they don't see themselves being there just for the sake of music. I would concur. I think I'm there for all those reasons too. But I'd also like to see that student be able to do things on their own. The self-gratification that they would feel and get from attacking a difficult area and conquering it is something that you can never replace for a person. Once they get that feeling and they know they can pick up that piece of music and do it on their own, it's empowering. And that empowerment can be taken to all kinds of challenges in life. When I've just conquered these difficult things, that's priceless in my view. And with it, we make music. We touch them in other ways. I think that we are multitasked, but if the kid cannot do anything without a spoon feeding them, I would question what we've done in that classroom. What are the results at the end of the year? If they cannot pick another piece of music and do it by themselves at any level, I would question what I had been doing in my classroom. But that's me. How do I get others to want that quest, to give everything they possibly can to a student? Yes, the mental health feeling, the community feeling, that what music does for us, all of those things. But I want them to be able to make music without me.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I see that as what should be kind of a universally agreed upon goal for all educators in all subjects. Meaning, for example, if we were to, you said earlier, if we were to ask the average person if music reading, if you're, say you're going to get a degree in music, would you expect that that person can read music? For example, just a very simple question. Most people would probably say yes. And not only would they say yes, but they would say yes, duh. Like, yes, why would you, that seems weird. And I think the reason the average person would say that is because, first of all, our instrumental colleagues don't have this argument. And number two, well, not as much anyway, but in number two, you would expect that if a person, say, has a degree in chemistry, that they can read the periodic table. that they can read they know what the symbols mean, and they could have an intelligent discussion and derive meaning from different combinations of those symbols. And you would be very suspicious of a university that's giving out degrees to people who in chemistry who cannot decipher the periodic table. I see it as really no different.
Totally great. I can't fathom the fact that we are putting out music majors who cannot read, but they're also coming to us with little to no skills. And so that brings us to the why. Why is this happening? Well, some states have been proponents of music literacy all the way along. Florida's been one of them. I was lucky enough to move here, which, moved me to become more involved in making sure my students could do things independently. But a lot of our states, you go, you sing your 3 songs. They don't check to see if the kid can do anything on their own. I think there should be sight reading at every festival. And if you read Asmus's article, he talks about the fact that festivals today, you sing your songs, but they aren't asking you to read. They're not helping to grow our students' literacy. If anything, a lot of teachers will gravitate to those festivals that don't require your students to read. Also, when we look at what's happening within each state, some states have high levels of expectation, which encourages the teacher to teach at that level. Some have low, and nobody wants to raise it. So then you come back, and this is something I deal with. Is it because they're afraid of it? Is it because they don't know how to teach it and weren't taught how to teach it? Is it they don't want to leave their comfort zone? I mean, there's lots of reasons for it. And so you have to step back and say, how can I entice them to want to raise the level of their expectations in the room? But that doesn't just mean raise it. It means I have to teach it and spiral them to it. So it is a joy and not a labor. And when I say the word sight reading to most people, what do you get back? Ugh. And instead, it should be an absolute joy. The way I teach music literacy, my kids are excited about it. They
Yep,
feel,
mine too.
yeah, they can't wait to do another level of it. And
Now,
what
not
do
at first, they're not.
no, it takes a little bit, but
Right.
success breeds success. And so part of it is we tend to start it teaching it up here when we need to start teaching it down here for a couple of reasons. One, if they're going to go on in music, they need to know how to start it at the very bottom. Not only that, if we started at the very bottom, we're probably going to fill in some of their gaps. And we all have gaps. And so in the process of teaching it from the very, very bottom, it's amazing how many things even I fill in for myself, or I realize, wow, I should have taught it this way earlier in my career. Instead, I started too high. So I'm in the process right now of reexamining how I started my progressive sight singing. I'm realizing I need to start it even lower. Do, re, mi, la, ti, do, beat and divided beat only, because that's where most of my constituents are. Sadly, but it is. So I know I've just touched on a whole bunch of subjects, but we have to wonder, why do our colleagues gravitate to festivals or things where they don't have to read? So why are they doing that? And I suspect a lot of the things I just said are list of the reasons all the way down.
Yeah. I know one of the reasons that I hear a lot is that some of these things tie back to, sadly, recruiting, meaning that if our kids don't get a high score on the thing we go to, they're going to quit because they want to. The choir teachers sometimes feel like they have to keep up with the Joneses of all the other competitive activities that are in their communities, and their kid can go win the trophy on the baseball team, and then they can lose the choir competition, and they're going to go play baseball because they want to go where they feel successful. And of course, then to me, the answer is don't lower the standard, learn how to teach the skill. But of course, that's a harder decision. So I'm going to tell you a story about Missouri because I think this is a relevant story. And I complain about this and I don't make friends when I do it, but that ship has sailed as far as I'm concerned. So in Missouri, our festival sight reading for large ensembles is, I think, probably one of the hardest in the United States. It's a 32 bar choral song So it's not an exercise, it's a song and it has words. And we get 2 minutes to look at it. It's a 4-part for SATB, 3-part for the TTB, and 3-part for the SSA. And it usually starts in a major key, modulates to the relative minor, and then modulates back. And we get to look at it for 2 minutes, make an attempt to sing it, look at it for 2 more minutes, make another attempt to sing it. Now, it used to be for many years that the second attempt, you must sing the words, which I loved because I saw that as a real world test, meaning that, for example, solfege is not the goal. When we're not teaching solfege as the goal. The goal is a product. And so I saw that little 15-minute experience of getting everybody in there, doing a solfege attempt. Okay, now let's try to formulate how the words would go together with that. And then let's read the words. And the second time our score would happen. So my colleagues then in Missouri decided a few years back that that was too hard. And so it is now optional to sing the words. So I've been told by some judges that I'm one of the only ones still in the state that does the words for the second attempt. And I'm telling this kind of a long story, but this last school year, the one we just, in March, we did our event. Our tenor bass group, which includes our beginning tenors and basses with our older kids, they combined together. They got a second tier rating on their sight singing. And it came from that we sang the words. 100% I asked them to sing the solfege the second time also, they would have fixed mistakes from the first time, and it would have been a superior rating. And we talked about it afterwards, and I said, guys, I'm okay with us getting the lower rating because we didn't do the real world skill, and we stumbled on it, and that's okay. We keep working harder next time. And they said, if we had sung the solfege, we wouldn't have missed any of those. I know that, but we learned that we have more work to do next year. So I see this trend. I guess I tell that story because I see the trend across the country too, with let's make these things easier so kids will engage. Thoughts? Do you see that too?
Totally. But I guess I would say first I'd be happy that they were doing some sight reading.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are a lot of classrooms that don't. So kudos to them for that. And then I would hope as they develop their own teaching skills and the curriculum for it, that they would gradually raise the bar every year and their expectations. If I saw that kind of progress, I would get really happy and throw a party practically for it. Because so many of the other situations, there's nothing happening. Every song is being taught by rote poorly. They're not even developing their listening skills with it and taking those skills and applying it. In other words, asking students questions. Well, compare those two phrases. Were they alike? Were they different? Instead, it's just bang the notes over and over, and they could actually turn it around and begin to get their kids to listen and take an active role in moving that train up the hill with the teacher. And I see that then as teachers are going to be happier, stay teaching longer, not quit so quickly, because it's tough if you're the only one pushing that train. So I guess this alludes back to when you and I you said something about when you first start, they don't like it.
Yeah.
That takes a lot of psychological warfare to convince them that this is actually a wonderful skill and that they should feel good about themselves. So we got to do that with our teachers, because if they don't even venture to try, and this pie in the sky of reading with the words isn't even on their radar. And so, I don't want to give them an out, but at this point in what I'm seeing, I'm just happy if I see them starting to put literacy into their classroom and give kids the key to learn how to do this on their own. So I'm looking for baby steps. I would get really excited if I was your adjudicator and somebody attempted this, to put the text with it. Oh my gosh, I'd have been clicking my heels together for you. So
Yeah, I will
kudos.
say that most adjudicators don't.
Really?
Yeah, a few times it's been pointed out to me that, you didn't have to sing the words. I know. I know. So it's an interesting thing. But here's what I think, Carol, for the next part of our conversation, we've complained a lot about the state of things, which is fine. And I think these are important conversations, but I want to go back into some evidence and some what do we do about it? Okay, since you're the solutions person, right? So we're going to talk about that. So in the Goodman's daughter paper you sent, I've actually used that paper also to cite in my literacy as equity episode, in my a cappella rehearsal episode, because I found this one as well as being an important uh, just perspective on some of these things. I'm going to read a couple quotes and then I want you to reflect. So one of the things that she points out, and this has become a real thing for me as well, which is to make the distinction between the term music reading and sight reading. One of the things that I've adjusted in my pedagogy is that I don't grade kids on their reading at first sight anymore. I grade them on rehearsal skills. In other words, can you put this music together without my help? If you can, then your grade is still at an A. If I have to help you, that's where you lose points. But if you make a mistake and you stop and fix it because you recognize that you made that mistake, then you're golden. And what I've discovered over the years with that is they also become better sight readers by me allowing them that stop and fix time. Is that something that aligns with your philosophy as well, or am I weird?
No, totally. For me, when we take out a new piece of music, I'll say, altos in that corner, tenor in that corner, everybody goes to their corners and you have 7 minutes. I don't know why 7 minutes, but that seems to be it. And 7 minutes to figure out as far as you can go. And you see them over leadership takes place. There will be some who are stronger in rhythm and some who are stronger in tonal, but they're working together to figure out this new piece. And I'll say, time's up, come back. And of course, in the meantime, I'm rotating around to see if I have any dirt roads I need to fix. But to me, it's more important that they can pick up a new piece and figure it out because it's like a math problem. A math problem isn't boom, you got the answer. There's all kinds of steps to getting that math problem. And so I want to see what they can do by applying their skills. So it's application. I'm very much like you in that respect. But then on the same wavelength, when we are reading or checking to see where we are, I want them to learn not to stop when you make a mistake. Keep right on going. And then we've got to go back and say, what can we do so we don't make that mistake again? What caused it? What was the problem? What do we need to hone our skills in that area with? And so I think it's the same thing then that they take back and apply to a piece of music. For example, maybe there's a new leap in there that they don't have under their belt. Well, they know how to take and go about fixing that. I'm going to sing every pitch up to it. I'm going to go back down. I'm going to jump between them. I'm going to put them into my oral concept. And then I hope the next time I sing that, I now have that in my tonal memory and I don't miss that leap. So if they can solve problems and figure out things that they may not be proficient at yet, I've given them a tool then to be able to take a piece from the start to a pretty good polished level without me having to help them. So I think we're probably very much on the same wavelength. And I don't like using the word sight reading. I hate that it's at my.
I'm trying to stop.
And so I try to say music literacy. No language arts teacher would say, take out Macbeth. We're going to sight read it today.
Yes, yes,
Nobody
exactly.
do that. So why are we doing that in music? We're going to make mistakes. The question is, how do I go back and fix it? And if we're in an ensemble setting, you can't stop. You got to keep right on it going. And I remember as a young pianist, the big trick was to get me to not stop when I made the mistake, that I had to go from square one to the next square. And so I think there's so many lessons to be learned in making music that never doesn't stop, even though there were errors in it. Then you go back and you figure out
Right.
what caused this problem.
Yes. Now I should make a distinction for listeners and for you, just so we're on the same page of when I tell kids that they should stop and fix things, and when I don't. So, for example, when we are in ensemble reading, we don't stop. We drill that in from the very beginning. We're not going to stop for anything because in that situation, if I individually make the mistake, I can stop myself and figure out where my section is, and I can get back on. But what I do, we also do individual literacy training with our kids. And when they're working on their own, I treat them like beginning language readers and I like your example of we're not going to sight read Macbeth. And so you wouldn't do that, but neither would you have a kid who is a new reader even read Macbeth.
Amen.
you would start with see spot run or whatever, or sight words, etc. And if the kid stumbled or took a second to sound it out or whatever, you wouldn't say, "Oh, this kid can't read. They didn't get it right the first time. They can't read." You would let them have that time to work it out, knowing that they would increase fluency the more times they do that. So that's the distinction I would make between how I treat that in class.
And I would agree with you because independent reading is much harder by
Mm-hmm.
solo reading. First of all, you're going to find out, can they keep beat? Can they keep the tonic? Because nerves are going to cause all kinds of different problems and issues. And we also can't expect them to read things that we have not already covered or made a part of their oral vocabulary. And so the visual vocabulary has to reflect a couple levels lower than what I'm already teaching their ears to hear. No, it's the acquisition of it. So it's the sound before the sight before we ever tell them the theory of it. No, there is two different sets there. And I don't think we do enough in our classrooms of individual. And that's where I do a lot more with audiation. I do things with improvisation because it's just getting them to voice and get their sound to come out. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
because it's cacophony in the room, but they're with their partner. And so there's a feeling of a safety net. It's safe to do this. You know, singing, you're so exposed. And I think we have to do TLC with it to get them to move to the next level to find out this isn't frightening. This is actually joyous, the fact that you were able to figure it out.
Right. Right. Okay, so now I want to put some more solutions in front of people here with some specific scenarios. Earlier you talked about how sometimes it's important for us to start more at the basic level than many of us want to or think we should, or maybe we're afraid that we're going to dumb it down and kids won't be interested in it anymore, etc. And so one of the things that I observe is that sometimes educators and teachers think of their kids as like, well, these are eighth graders or these are seventh graders, and seventh graders should know how to XYZ. And by eighth grade, they should be able to XYZ. When in reality, they could be completely beginners, in which case they need to go back to square one,
Mhm.
or they could be truly, I've seen, for example, some middle school kids that can read better than a lot of high school kids can because they have instruction from elementary school straight on, but that's not all eighth graders. So what I'm wondering is if you would give the advice to an educator of like, how do I know what level my kids should be doing? How do I know where to start if I've got kids that I have to assess at the beginning of the year? What would be your advice to those teachers?
I still would say to them, go back to the very beginning because you don't know the gaps that exist in each of those kids. Maybe they know this, but they don't know this.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, and if they really get it and get it quickly, then we're going to go through it rather fast. If not, then I have to make sure that I'm, first of all, unifying the terminology that I might be using in comparison to what they had in middle school or elementary. I may not use those terms in the exact same way. It's why I tell even high school kids who pass the AP theory exam, theory one when you go to college, because it's just going to make you more. In other words, you'll be able to do it quicker and you will fill in any gaps that you might have had out of that AP theory class. We don't know what they have, and they're coming from umpteen different elementary schools. They're not going to be unified, not that like they are perhaps in math or language arts. Well, they're going to be coming from all different areas of where there was strength and where there were weaknesses in their teachers. So I would say go very back to the beginning. Here's the other thing I tell them. Throughout the year, I'm going to have new students come in and I'm going to have students within this classroom. John, would you take our new student and go work on this element for the next 10 minutes? And then that student comes back and I say, Sally, would you go with this student and work on these elements? And sometimes those students are not even my best students. They're my middle of the road students
Yeah.
because I know in the process of teaching it, they're going to get better. Not only that, if I don't start you at the bottom, how are you going to be able to ever help your own kids that you might have and or the going to college to become a teacher? If you've only ever done this, The hardest thing in college to teach our kids is to go to the very bottom. And no, you can't use that word. They don't know what that word is yet. How are you going to explain that word? And so I think we're just preparing them to actually be able to break things apart and figure out, how do I layer this for somebody? And that can only happen if I've taken you back to the bottom.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really good. And I think that idea that it doesn't matter how old they are, it
Mm-mm.
matters where they are in the scaffolding of these skills. And to me, that my story rings true with that, because I remember even as an undergraduate college student, I was for the very first time ever in my life given a line to sight read where I didn't have the piano to play it. And because I had grown up playing an instrument, I had a basic piano skills and I played a saxophone. And I remember thinking when I was handed that for the first time, there isn't any way to do this. Why can't I use the piano? I can learn this really fast if I have the piano. And then fast forward to the story I've told many times on the show where I had choir rehearsals that I couldn't play the piano well enough anymore to do that. And I had to figure out how to rip off the band-aid and start using these skills to build my choirs. And I am now personally a much better musician. I can look at a score and just hear it in my head. And I can, when I'm diagnosing things in front of a choir, I can detect where the mistakes are and pounce on it quicker, not in a mean way, but like in a let's go fix that kind of a way. I'm a better teacher. I'm a better conductor because I taught kids how to do this. And that is also true if we're letting eighth graders teach kids how to do these basic skills.
Think of it this way. If I moved to France, even though I have a doctorate, where would I start in French? With a primer, with a
Hmm.
picture book. And so um, I have students. It doesn't matter whether I'm teaching middle school, high school, or college. I have kids coming to me who do not have these skills. And frankly, that college kid who comes in on level needs to see how I'm going to deal with the student who doesn't have the skills, because they may not have been privy to a teacher who was doing a step by step spiral. So they too need to see that process. I think the process for me, anyway, is the most important thing. The product will be there because of the process. But if I ignore the process, then I've not given that gift to my students. So I've never had many kids give me a hard time. Sometimes I say to them, "Hey, could you be third graders for about the next 10 minutes?" And they will. They will. At this, I do this at all levels. And sometimes they get a little overtly rambunctious and you'll see them hitting each other a little bit. And I said, "Not that much third grade, please."
Yeah.
But, so I need to make sure that you don't have any big gaps. And so I've not had pushback from that at all. Instead, I get kids come to my office and say, "Oh, Mama Kay, I'm so glad you did that because I've never understood it. And this is the first time I've really understood where this was or how this sounded or why." And so just think about our groups, 60 to 80 kids at a time. We're lucky if our choir is only 40. And even 40, how did we get to them? How do we not have kids at all levels within that spiral to not want to go back at the fall of the year and go through it again? I believe I go back to the very bottom in January because I've probably gotten new kids in. And I may finally now have a kid who didn't want to be in my choir now going, "I love being in choir," but they missed the whole first 6 weeks because they had a negative attitude in that classroom and wasn't soaking it up. Well, if I really care about my kids, I'm going to go back and I'm going to go through it quicker. But it just solidifies everything. It gets everybody closer to being on a level that we can contribute to that ensemble. And, kids want to be a part. They don't want to have to follow their neighbor all the time.
Hmm.
Sometimes they're too embarrassed and need to go back to the bottom. So I want to take that fear away. I'm just going to say we're going to be third graders. So, okay. So
That's
I'm,
no, sorry, I was going to interject on that point that you just made, because that's one of my big things too, is that kids know deep down, they know that the choir made a product and I didn't contribute to that.
yeah. They do.
They know that they're following on their neighbor's coattails, and that's basically the argument that I try to make for this individual instruction piece that I think should be part of every kid's music education. They have the right, in my opinion, to know enough to contribute to their group, even if it's less than someone else. Like even if their contribution is less than the band piano lesson kid who's in choir, who already knows all these things and is singing more confidently, even the beginner kid deserves to know enough to feel like concert time comes, I'm listening to that recording afterwards, I helped do that with my own brain. And I think that that's where the individual piece comes in.
Also, if you don't assess your students individually, collectively the group will get better. But when you go to individually assess each of those kids, you're going to find that hardly any of them took a big step up. Assessment has to be done for the reason of, how do I know where I should teach tomorrow? Where should I go back and fill in? Where are the gaps in these students? Remember, assessment first and foremost is for me, the teacher. And if I'm not assessing them individually, I won't know where the bottom is and I won't know where the top is. I can assume, but the assessment to me is so important for me. So at the collegiate level, I like to have them come in and throughout the semester and individually sing for me and do certain skills. And I don't want it to be necessarily threatening or anything like that. If anything, I want it to be less than that. But, what they have under their belt and they own tells me where I need to begin tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Now, I want to go one final direction here, which is that your progressive sight singing, your method, which is essentially the philosophy that we've been discussing, and you and I align on a lot, but you're also a really big proponent of the concept of sound before sight. And you like to help encourage people to do rote songs, but also to be careful that you're not doing this wrong. There's like there are goals and there are things that you do when you're doing rote instruction with kids that do have the goal later on of helping them read, and that just because it's rote doesn't mean that it's going to guide them towards reading. Thoughts about that?
Well, rote has a place in all learning. We all begin with rote. And so I find that the eyes of some of my students may be developed to a certain point, but their ears aren't. We are weak in this country in our ears. So I start with simple songs, real simple. And they probably don't do more than do through so, and they may not have anything more to them than beat and divided beat. But I'm going to ask them to show me with their hands as I sing it on a neutral syllable, whether it went high or lower. Well, I have kids that can't tell me whether it went up or down. And this is in college. They really can't tell me. I will also sing a little simple song, and ask them to draw the shape of what that phrase did. I will also ask them to take a whiteboard and start to think about, was that a long note? Was that a short note? I want to just know if they can begin to give me anything in the area of the rhythm with it. I sometimes just ask, in other words, when I do a rote song, I never say, listen to my rote song, because they're not listening. Their brain is off. I can't wait for lunch. I wonder what we're going to have today. It's nothing about the music. So you have to give them something to do. Show me the pitch levels. Look at the board. I have 4 phrases written up there. And in Iconics, what order did I do my song in? Oh, Mama Kay, you did phrase 3, then phrase 1, because they had to look at to see whether it was going up or down. How was the rhythm in it? I'm asking them to physically do things with whenever I do a rote song. Then I go to the next level. After we've been singing it a little bit, then I'll ask them, how many phrases were in my song? Now, I would have done the song by shaping each phrase. Take the breath. Here comes the next phrase. And they're doing it with me. Monkey see, monkey do. So that they'll finally say, oh, there were 2 phrases. And I'll go, you're right. What about those 2 phrases? Were they exactly the same? Were they different? And I will give them options to help teach them vocabulary. They were the same except at the end. Well, how did they differ at the end? One went up and one went down. Okay. We'll also stop in the middle of our songs and I'll say, sing me the tonic. And by the way, I do this in all my octavos too. Then
Mm-hmm.
it becomes sing me the dominant to the tonic. Of course, we'll have been working on that. Great. In this little rote song, sing me the subdominant to the dominant to the tonic. I'm working on teaching them even harmonic things in it. So everything I'm doing with them, it might even be, let's sing that rote song together again on a neutral syllable. Actually, change that. Let's sing it on longs and shorts. Sing that song on the longs and shorts that you heard rhythmically while we sing it. And I ask them to do it in their hands so I can see them. So here's the long and here's our shorts. But when I do that long, you can't believe the difference I get in how they sing those long notes. Suddenly they have energy. They don't decay like it would if the piano had been teaching it. It changes even their vocal production. So I have a whole list of things. And just because I teach some simple little songs doesn't mean I stop. I keep doing rote songs all year long. And each rote song becomes more difficult as their skills get better. And then my questioning becomes more involved. And
Yeah.
then those questions can go directly to the octavos that we're working on because I've again taught them basic things about the structure of the music, the patterns. Hey, listen to my song. When you hear this pattern, raise your hand. Now you've heard my song twice. Get ready to raise your hand when we sing the highest pitch, or get ready to raise your hand when we sing the lowest pitch. How many heard that syncopation in that song? When we get to it, raise your hand. I'm going to find out if a kid knows what that syncopation is. I'm going to find out if they can hear it. There's no visual at first. And then I move to iconic with them. So in other words, almost all new terminology is introduced to my students first through their ears. Why? Because music is an oral art. It's not a visual art. And we often go, me included, go too quickly to notation when they really don't understand the notation. And I need them instead to hear the sound, have the labels. Then I'm going to show you in iconics first, where you can really see it. And then I will show it to you in notation, in
Yeah.
symbolic notation. So I go through a 3-step process, but at the end, what those kids can hear and can do, then you take it a step further. Now we're getting ready. We're 2 weeks out from our contest or festival or whatever you want to call it, or a concert. And I'll say, we're going to sing this song and I want you to tell me everything you heard that we need to fix.
Mm-hmm.
And now their ears are incredible. So then I write it down on the board or I have somebody do it. And then I come back the next day with everything that needs to be fixed yet in order of how I'm going to fix it. But the cool thing is sometimes mistakes don't make it out to us. They sit in the back row, or it's a mumbling back there that somebody isn't on the pitch, or there's a couple of problems, or the diction isn't just right. The cool thing is because their ears are so good, they can begin to tell you the things that were positive and that we're really doing well and the things we've got to fix. And
Yes.
so now instead of me being the only one in the room with their ears like that, I have everyone in the room. So those rote songs, almost everybody can be successful on them, which is pretty awesome. And I can begin to teach all kinds of oral skills right through it, not through theory necessarily, but all the rote songs that I hope I have strategically picked so that it takes them from simple to more advanced. So I'm writing some more materials along that line. And I went looking for Lati Do songs, found I couldn't find any. So I went looking for good poetry and then wrote 5, 6 Lati Do songs so that I can begin back there with rote songs first and the patterning before we finally get to the point where we're actually able to follow from the beginning to the end of a notation, simple notation, because the eyes have to be trained. They not only have to go left to right, which we hope they've gotten in linguistics, but they have to go up and down. And that's a skill that, yes, that has not been taught. And so I'm using first iconics to get the eyes to work a little easier and not to, and for them to feel successful and want to do this and get excited about what they're doing before I go to notation. So often we'll have a line of iconics. Right underneath it, I will have a line of the notation, perhaps in 4/4. And right under that, I have the notation for 4/2, because I'm also a believer that I'm not going to stick my kid only in major or only in simple meter. I want my kids to be able to read at an early level already. Half note gets a beat, quarter note gets a beat, compound immediately. Compound and simple are taught together. So there's a comparison and contrast between the two. And again, it all starts with rote songs. Hopefully their ears are picking up on it. They're beginning to feel the difference. Oh, wow. This song, the beat was divided into 3 pieces. This song, it was only divided into 2. Well, we call that one with the 3 compound, and the one where the beat is divided into 2 simple. So you're taking it apart without it being on paper. It's all with the ears. And I'm not going to tell you that our kids are well developed with the ears. It's why I'm using so many rote songs, because often, look, we've all been there. Tenors made the same mistake for the 47th time. They don't hear it as a mistake, so they're not going to fix it. And
Yeah.
so I need to go back and say, I didn't cover enough of that in my rote teaching for them to begin to hear the difference in comparison and contrast. Now I know I've just blabbed on here for
No,
quite a while.
it's okay. I actually have uncovered in that demonstration that you just gave, which I think was great. It's exactly what I asked you for. But maybe the first little area of what I would call a disagreement with you, although it is very minor and it might just be semantics, but I'm going to let you react to it. So you said that we oftentimes go to notation too soon. And I don't disagree, other than I would just say it differently. I would say, because in my experience, even with true beginners, I can have quite a bit of success going to notation even on day one. It's that I think that we go to too complicated of a
Yes,
notation
yes,
too soon.
yes, yes.
For example, I even would consider, this may be controversial, but I would even consider solfege hand signs notation. Like it's like sign language,
It is.
or creating a simple just on a whiteboard using the letters DRM for do re mi. They can read something on day one.
And that's the iconic. The do re mi is the iconic. And so I have it all laid up so they can see every whole step and every half step, because the staff doesn't tell us a major third and a minor third. And so my kids begin to see it immediately, day one. That's the iconic. So we're going to go from the sound to an iconic representation, which Bruner would be very happy over. And then eventually we're going to go to symbolic notation. But what do I see in most bands? And unfortunately, too many choirs. Immediately the 5-line staff, immediately all of that. And their eyes aren't even ready to go up and down. So it's not the age of the student, it's the experience of the student. And I'm going to get college kids who have little to no skills. They definitely don't have reading skills, and they need to go back to square one. And that goes back to what Asmus says. He said they're playing and they're singing up here, but when we ask them to read, it's way down here.
Yeah, yeah,
And so I know you and I agree on so many things. So it is just semantics.
yeah,
Call it iconic reading. And they're going to do some of that already the first day. Absolutely. I'm going to push them as quickly as I can, but I'm going to try really hard not to have them leave my classroom feeling unsuccessful.
yeah. Absolutely, and that is really the key of giving them the tools to do the thing we're asking them to do. And I think oftentimes what we see is we see colleagues that just ask them to do the thing and then figure out the tools afterwards. And then what that ends up doing is creating a mythology that reading music is really only for the hyper talented. And the reality is that people believe that because if the pedagogy is so lacking, then the kids that rise to the top will be the talented ones who will honestly be able to read whether you teach it well or not.
Correct. About 25%, some say as much as a third, of our kids don't need as much of a sequential. They'll figure
Correct.
it out.
With linguistic reading too.
Yes, with totally the same. But you've got a good 50% of your population who really needs step-by-step instruction, and they can do well. And you probably have a smaller percentage that really need slow remediation teaching because they have processing problems in different ways that may show up even more prevalent in the music area than it does in the linguistic area. So, yeah, I mean, how do I say this nicely? I read the research, and the research tells me a lot, but I have to take that research and turn it into teaching tools and learning tools for my students to be able to access and learn step by step how to do something to feel successful at it. And so it's great that they tell us, that the kids will hear patterns better and learn to read better if we use patterns than if we teach them individual notes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But I walk in classrooms and what are they teaching? Individual notes. But we hear everything in groupings and patterns. That's how we hear it, just like words. So I look at the research and say, okay, what can I do to help my student start at the very bottom with these little patterns and progress at a level that still keeps them excited about learning? So there's a real fight sometimes within me to not push them too fast, to not keep them too slow. In other words, pacing's always an issue. And to meet my top-notch kids and my kids who are here, what can I do with other activities? And so then I use a lot more audiation, improvisation. I'm trying to find games, activities that are going to give them practice without boring them. Also allows that kid who needs to soar to soar. And I'm sure that other teachers feel the same way. I'm sure you do. But ultimately, my choir is only as good as the weakest person I have in it. So how do I help that child become very productive and chugging away at the top of their game? And so some of these tools, wrote songs, everything, I'm trying to develop teaching tools that teachers can back to their classroom to have results pretty quickly with their students and not have the pushback. Because if they get the pushback, many of them will put it away. And our teachers won't teach the literacy part.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. Music is that kind of comes down finally to these points for me, which is music is a language more so than we sometimes will admit or acknowledge. And all language requires context in order for it to be understood, hence the patterns aspect, right? So sometimes I explain this to people and to my students also as I'll say, what does mean? And then they'll say, well, it doesn't mean anything. And I'm like, well, yes, but if I put other noises around it, suddenly it can have meaning. And I'll say, like, what does who mean? Well, it's just a note. That means nothing to you. You couldn't tell me what key it's in. You would have to assume a whole bunch of things to even know, like, is that do? I don't know. Without any notes around it, it could be anything. And so that I think that's a starting point for a lot of these conversations. And kids, when they learn these skills, even if they are super basic, if they are doing them independently, they will have fun. They will learn to enjoy it. They will not quit your class, and they will actually feel very, very powerful. And I think that's the goal for both you and I. But before we wrap this up, though, Carol, would you please tell us? And I know you told us this last time you were with me, but I'll do it again. How do we find progressive sight singing? How do we get the book and the materials, and then also any direction for people who want to come to one of your extremely popular workshops? How do they find that information?
Oh, okay. I have a website, KruegerMusic.com, and my last name is Krueger. So KarolKruegerMusic.com. All of the workshops are listed there for this summer already. And the book can be accessed already through my website. And I would tell you to go to my website because the website for the book is listed there. And I can read it off, but it's a little bit long. It's oup.com/he/Krueger, and that's KRUEGER 4E. It's the 4th edition. Everyone should go check out the learning website for Oxford because so many of my teaching tools are already there for you free. There's no charge. It's not password protected in any way, shape, or form. So every one of the vocal pitch exercises, there's over 100 of them. They're there. All of the rhythm patterns are done in flashcards. They're there. The tonal ones are all done. I can't begin to tell you how much I've added to that website for Oxford to help teachers in the field. I know you don't have money. I know you don't have time to do some of these things. So I convinced them to not password protect it. So it's there. Please go use it. All I would ask is please don't sell it because I've experienced that. Please do not put your name on them and present with it. Please give me credit for having done the work, but do go check it out. And the book is also available as an ebook, so you can easily project it for your class. It is very progressive, but it still allows you to teach one thing before another in some cases. If you buy it, great. If you don't, I'm fine with that. What I'm more excited about is if you might take some of these materials and take it to your classroom and find that, yes, indeed, there's a place for you to start, that your kids can actually enjoy doing this. If you come to the workshop, you'll get tons of games and even more materials. I'm really about helping teachers because I didn't have this kind of help. And I knew I didn't know what I should have known. And so it was a hard knock life, so to speak. So if I can help someone else develop their students to the highest level possible and love going to work and skip to work and click your heels together because you've got a band of people around you who just want to learn, learn, learn. So there is a website connected with Progressive Sightseeing. Please go visit it. Please go visit my website for a list of all of the workshops for this summer. And there are plenty of them. And I also do a lot of PDs throughout the year. And I am not an expensive person. I do it out of passion. And don't be afraid to ask if I can fit it in my schedule. I will. I am pro teacher, pro students, and pro music. And so sometimes we as music teachers don't get a lot of professional development in our schools. So ask if I'm available to come. I will.
Awesome. Well, Carol, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and spending time again on the show. And maybe let's do a part 3 in another year or two.
Love to. Thank you so much. And keep up the good work.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So we wrapped up this episode here, but Carol and I actually kept talking for a good 20 minutes. She just unloaded a whole bunch more examples and discussions. She even had a friendly debate with me about the use of metronome that she sees me use in some of my videos on Facebook. So I decided to take that episode. I didn't want to make an hour and a half long episode. So I now have the rest of that conversation with Carol. So paid subscribers over on Substack and Patreon will have access on the private podcast feed, in addition to the entire history of that private podcast feed. For those bonus conversations and extra content, if you head on over there to Patreon or Substack and get subscribed, you will be able to access the rest of this conversation. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of a conversation. If you are still hearing my voice, that means you're one of the MVPs, one of the diehards, one of the real ones, as the kids say. So if you are willing on the way out to check out a few different ways that you can help me continue to make this show high quality. 1, use the promo code. That's the biggest one. At Sight Reading Factory, at mymusicfolders.com, at mychoirropes.com, at graphitepublishing.com, and endeavormusicpublishing.com. All of those take the Choirlosophy checkout code. And of course, now the newest one is 3-Minute Theory. You can get a 15% discount when you enter Choirlosophy at checkout there. And of course, going to Apple Podcasts and leaving a positive review is very helpful there, and sharing the episodes to your colleagues in real life and on social media. All of those things are incredibly helpful. And allow me to continue to create this resource for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.